My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/campaign to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Welcome to Mind Love, episode 263. Today's episode is all about a revolutionary breakthrough in healing mental health through metabolism and improving treatment for anxiety, depression, OCD, PTSD, and more.
Mitochondria in our cells are the primary regulators of metabolism. And that once you understand all of the fascinating things that mitochondria do for the human body, you can actually make sense of mental illness. You can actually make sense of all of the risk factors, but you can also make sense of the symptoms and everything. And it leads to treatments that can actually heal people's brains, that can actually put chronic, serious disorders like bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, that right now we tell people those are lifelong disorders and you're kind of screwed. It changes that paradigm. It says, no, these are metabolic brain disorders, and we can use metabolic treatments to essentially put their illness into remission.
Turn up your frequency with Mind Love. Bite-sized brain hacks for seekers, dreamers, and doers. It's time to give your mind a little love with your host, Melissa Monti.
If this is your first time giving your mind a little love, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Mind love is a habit, and the more you give your mind that love and intention, the better you'll feel about yourself and your life. Plus, it's really a win-win because more subscribers means Mind Love attracts even more amazing guests to bring you their wisdom. So don't forget to subscribe. Today, I'd like to share a review from K1919 who says, I haven't had much luck with books, etc. on mindfulness and was close to throwing in the towel. This podcast has renewed my faith, and I'm really looking forward to learning more about this field. Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be a part of your journey. There's a lot in the mindfulness space, so don't give up just yet, and I'm really glad to be a resource for you. And thank you so much for leaving this review. What if I told you that new research is showing that everything we've previously known about mental health is wrong? You might have noticed headlines trending recently. Headlines like, breaking, depression is not caused by a chemical imbalance in the brain. Or, breaking, research fraud. Is everything we think we know about Alzheimer's disease wrong? So basically, decades of research, drugs, and treatments for mental illness is worthless. Well, kinda. Based on fraud or misinformation. Where were the tech giants and almighty fact checkers figuring that out, huh? What infuriates me about this the most is that your friendly local holistic doctor probably could have told you all that decades ago. And yet still, Wikipedia lists functional medicine as quackery. But Big Pharma, with all their fraudulent data and research and scandals and legal settlements and criminal fines, they are the bearers of truth. Okay, I'll get off my soapbox now. This episode is a divine gift. And no, it's not a spiritual episode, but the timing of this information is crazy because it's been the topic that's been mulling around in my thoughts for months, maybe even years now. I've known that mental health is directly impacted by food, but I didn't know the specifics of what exactly was going on. Specifically, it's directly impacted by metabolism, which is impacted by not just food, but also lifestyle. It's also something I've personally dealt with in my distant past as well as recently. One of the ways I first started managing my ADD holistically was through diet, and movement, and structure, and all the things. But I started with diet. And then recently, I went through an entire diet overhaul from what I thought was healthy to what I'm learning is healthier, and noticed an immediate lift in my mind, which I was not even expecting. Less brain fog, also more optimism. I didn't even realize I had this mild cloud of depression for probably 2 years. And I didn't realize this because there were dozens of other factors in the world around me and in my own big life changes that could have been impacting my mindset. But when I started eating differently and felt differently within days, I realized that diet was likely the biggest impact, despite becoming a mom and moving and the world shutting down and everything going crazy. So in this interview, you will hear a little bit of why I am no longer vegan and possibly causes of my symptoms. I'm still learning, so I'm not an expert in this lifestyle shift yet, but I hope to become one. I also always want to send my love to the vegans and the meat eaters and apologize for any overconfidence I may have had a few years ago in episodes preaching veganism, because I know there were probably a few. And this episode is not about veganism or pro-metabolic eating, which is what I'm following now. It's about the way our food impacts our minds and how exactly mental illness is related to your metabolic function and what you can do to improve it. And our guest is Dr. Christopher Palmer. He's a Harvard psychiatrist and researcher working at the interface of metabolism and mental health. He's the director of the Department of Postgraduate and Continuing Education at McLean Hospital, and also an assistant professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. So he's got a lot going on. And on top of all that, he has been pioneering the use of the medical ketogenic diet in the treatment of psychiatric disorders, conducting research in this area, treating patients, writing and speaking around the world on this topic. And most recently, he has developed the first comprehensive theory of what causes mental illness, integrating existing theories and research into one unifying method, the brain energy theory of mental illness. This is pioneering research, so get excited because it will change the way you view and approach mental health. So 3 key things we will learn are how and why some psychiatric medications cause harm and keep people ill, why and how metabolism and mitochondria can explain all of the symptoms of mental illness, and how to self-assess your metabolic and mental health. Before we go deep today, I want to give you a little gift, and I want to give it to you every single day. It's called the Morning Mind Love. I know how life can be. You're all fired up after an inspiring episode, and then a new day or a new challenge comes at you, and it's just hard to keep up that energy. Well, the Morning Mind Love is kind of like an oracle from your higher self to help you start each day with a positive focus. Plus, when you sign up, you get 2 free gifts, a 30-minute binaural meditation and 30 days of journaling prompts to help you remember who you truly are. And it's all completely free. So join over 9,000 people and go to mindlove.com to sign up, or text the word morning to 33777. And now let's welcome Chris Palmer to the show.
Thank you, Melissa, for having me.
So what sparked your realization that metabolism is deeply integrated with mental illness?
It's a great question. And, the real answer is that, I've been thinking about this for over 20 years. And I think it started with my own personal experience. I ended up changing my diet to a low carbohydrate diet over 20 years ago. And I did it because I had metabolic syndrome and I was trying to reverse my metabolic syndrome. I had tried lots of other things. I had been religiously on a low fat diet. I had exercised regularly. I was doing everything I was supposed to be doing, and nothing was working. So I ended up trying a low carbohydrate diet to see if it will help my metabolic syndrome. And sure enough, it did. Within 3 months, everything was better. My metabolic syndrome was reversed. I no longer had high blood pressure, no longer had bad cholesterol or lipid levels, no longer had prediabetes. All of it went away. But the striking thing that I noticed was that there were mental changes in me. I had more energy, more confidence. My mood was better. My sleep was dramatically better. I was waking up before my alarm went off and feeling refreshed. And that never, ever happened to me. And so I started recommending the diet to other people, friends, family. They were reporting, some of them were reporting similar benefits. And so I started using low carbohydrate diets, clinical practice in people with treatment-resistant depression, anxiety, personality disorders. And it was working for some people. It did not work across the board. It is not a cure-all, but it was working for a significant number of people who had tried dozens of psychiatric medications, decades of psychotherapy and other treatments, and those had failed to work for them. But things took a dramatic turn for me in 2016 when one of my patients with schizoaffective disorder asked for my help to lose weight. And he had been my patient for 8 years at that point. He had hallucinations and delusions every day. He was tortured by his illness. He was pretty much a hermit. He was terrified to go out in public. He was convinced everybody was trying to get him or trying to hurt him. They were all part of these conspiracy theories. And I just set out to help him lose weight, even though I was using this for depression. Schizophrenia is very different than depression. So I was like, there's no way. I'm just trying to help the guy lose weight. He wants to lose some weight. Maybe it'll help his self-esteem or something. Like, it'll be good. And within 2 weeks, he started losing weight. And I noticed that. But I also noticed this antidepressant effect coming out. And it was striking in him because he was so sedated from all the meds he was taking. And he was like a zombie. And so I noticed he started making better eye contact and everything else. Within 2 months, he spontaneously starts reporting to me that, you know those voices that I hear all the time? They're going away. You know those delusions that I've had for years, how I thought all these people were out to get me and all these conspiracy things? I'm like, yeah, I know about them. He's like, I think that's going away too. Like, I don't think that stuff is true, and maybe it never was. And I was blown away. I mean, that man went on to lose over 160 pounds and keep it off to this day. He was able to do things he had never been able to do since the time of his diagnosis. He was able to go out in public again. He was able to complete a certificate program, able to perform improv in front of a live audience. So I'm blown away. I quickly start researching, like, what the hell's happening in front of me? Like, this is impossible. This cannot be happening. And I quickly learned, like, I had already known that the ketogenic diet or low carbohydrate diets were used for weight loss and for diabetes. I did not know they were used for epilepsy. I learned very quickly that the ketogenic diet is actually a 100-year-old treatment for epilepsy. And the reason that was so important to me is because we use epilepsy treatments in psychiatry all the time. And there's a tremendous amount of neuroscience showing that this diet can change neurotransmitter levels, brain inflammation, the gut microbiome, all sorts of things that we know play a role in mental illness. And so with that, I quickly started using this diet in dozens of additional patients. I was collaborating with researchers all over the world. My career kind of took a left turn at that point. And all the while, even though we had all this neuroscience literature and we use epilepsy treatments, I didn't stop there, because this was like flying in the face of everything that I had been taught as a psychiatrist. Schizophrenia does not go away. It just doesn't. Even with the best treatments that we have to offer, schizophrenia is not supposed to go away. And it sure as hell isn't supposed to go away with a change in diet. Like, what? And so I was fascinated, dumbfounded, intrigued, curious as hell. Like, how can I make sense of this? And so pretty much ever since then, I have been obsessive about trying to understand what on earth is happening. Like, I already knew it treated depression, but now it also treats schizophrenia. And how does that make sense? And oh, by the way, it's also a good weight loss tool, and it's used for diabetes. What the hell do those things have to do with mental illness? And it was actually those kind of questions that led me to formulate the theory that I have formulated. And at the end of the day, if I skip through all of the science that I have learned over the last 6-7 years, and that I integrated with all of the neuroscience and clinical science that I already knew as an academic psychiatrist for over 27 years now. So I'm putting this all together with everything that I already know as an academic psychiatrist and trying to make sense of it. I ended up coming to the conclusion across the board that all mental disorders are metabolic disorders of the brain. And in one way, this is kind of obvious to anybody who really understands metabolism, because metabolism is kind of part of the definition of life. And so on one hand, it's kind of like, well, duh, Chris Palmer, everybody's already kind of known that. Like, of course, it's got to be related somehow. But once you understand that and then start asking other questions like, well, what controls metabolism? Like how, like, and what exactly is a metabolic problem? Like, what does that even mean? What does it mean when we say cardiovascular disease is a metabolic problem? What does it mean when we say diabetes is a metabolic problem? And how do they connect? What connects them? Like we use the term metabolism, but most people don't really think about or understand what that means at the cellular level. And so I ended up doing these deep dives to the cellular level to try to make sense of, well, what does that mean? And after all was said and done, I realized that mitochondria in our cells are the primary regulators of metabolism. And that once you understand all of the fascinating things that mitochondria do for the human body, you can actually make sense of mental illness. You can actually make sense of all of the risk factors, but you can also make sense of the symptoms and everything. And it leads to treatments that can actually heal people's brains, that can actually put chronic serious disorders like bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, that right now we tell people those are lifelong disorders and you're kind of screwed. It changes that paradigm. It says, no, these are metabolic brain disorders, and we can use metabolic treatments to essentially put their illness into remission. And they don't have to be disabled by their symptoms and their illness anymore. We can do something, and we can do something based on what we know today. And so in my mind, this theory, this book has the potential to completely transform the mental health field.
You know what's interesting about mindfulness? It's not just about being present in the moment. It's about being thoughtful about the future. We meditate, we exercise, we work on ourselves, all to create a better tomorrow, right? But there's one piece of the future planning puzzle that nobody likes to talk about. I get it. Life insurance feels heavy. But here's the thing. Just like meditation is an act of self-care, getting life insurance is an act of family care. It's about making sure your love continues to support your family, even when you're not there to do it yourself. That's why I want to tell you about SelectQuote. They're one of America's leading insurance brokers with nearly 40 years of experience helping over 2 million customers. Their licensed insurance agents work for you to tailor a life insurance policy for your individual needs in as little as 15 minutes. And here's what's cool. They actually reward you for taking care of yourself. If you're in good health, they work with carriers that could get you same-day coverage for up to $5 million. No medical exam required. And it's way more affordable than you might think. You could even get coverage for up to $1 million for as little as $20 per month. We just did this all recently after putting it off for years, and I can't tell you the peace of mind just from getting it done. So get the right life insurance for you for less at selectquote.com/mindlove. Go to selectquote.com/mindlove today to get started. That's selectquote.com/mindlove.
Add $179 million in total cash prizes.
Mom, what are you doing?
Mix in 3-parts bills, bonus boxes, and multipliers.
Is this some kind of recipe?
Gradually stir in a ton of excitement.
Oh, you're trying to make Ohio Lottery holiday scratch-offs, aren't you? Stop overcomplicating things. Just go buy all your favorites like Holiday Cash, Holiday Lucky Times 10, and Merry Money.
Oh, that is easier.
Uh-huh.
Now help sift non-winning tickets into My Lotto Rewards for a second chance to win.
Play Holiday Scratch-Offs. Lottery players are subject to Ohio laws and condition regulations. Play responsibly.
So I did believe that mental issues begin in the gut. But before I was going through all of your research, it was more of the begin in the gut. I didn't know how everything kind of went together. And like you said, it's like, yeah, we can say that it starts here, but how is it all related? So this is so on the top of my mind right now, though, because recently I'm pregnant right now. I'm 4 months pregnant. My last pregnancy was 2 years ago, and I fell into a really deep depression during that time. And it was really surprising to me because I was the host of Mind Love. I had all the tools. I had already gotten over this, right? Like, why isn't this working? And so I was going through these feelings of being a fraud, and maybe everything I learned wasn't real, and like, what have I even been talking about? And thankfully I ended up having an interview this one day I wanted to cancel, and really she just brought me back to a lot of the tools I knew. So I did have the tools to kind of move through that, but it was really difficult for me. And I was worried that that was going to happen with this pregnancy too. I was worried I was going to have postpartum depression. I did not, but I will be honest, the last couple of years, I've just felt it more difficult to just be at baseline. Like, I've had to use all of my tools. And there's every excuse in the world because of everything that's happened in the world in the last 2 years, right? So I'm like, yeah, but of course, when we moved to a small town and it's been a transition, and now I'm a new mom and that's been a transition, and the world shut down and that's been a transition, and we don't know about the future, that's been a transition. So that's kind of where I've been, and thankfully I do have all of these amazing tools that I can go to, and I journal and whatever, but I've had to use all of them the last few years. Well, when this pregnancy came around, not only was I super sick, like could not get out of bed for weeks, I also was having all of those depressive thoughts, and thoughts like, I don't want to be here anymore. And I wouldn't do anything, but like, those thoughts make me nervous because I've been in that place in my early 20s and I don't want to go back there. And so I decided, like, there's got to be something different. If I'm so healthy like I think I am, like I ate whole foods, not a lot of processed foods, organic, vegan, thought it was the healthiest way to be. But why was I so sick, and why did I feel this way? I was not really thinking about my mindset at that time. Well, I finally read a book called How to Heal Your Metabolism from a friend who had been vegan for her whole life and found herself in a spot that she was almost dying, and really had to have this whole paradigm shift, had to eat meat for the first time in her whole life, and she's been on a healing journey for the last couple of years. Well, she planted a seed with me in 2020 because I stayed with her for 3 weeks. And I reached out to her when I was going through all these issues, and she gave me a whole protocol on this book. And so, long story short, the last 2 months, I've been reintroducing meat and dairy, doing this whole protocol on healing my metabolism, and having to really work through all of my vegan ideologies and wondering how this fit. Well, what I didn't expect to happen within a couple of weeks of eating this new way, it was like my mind was clear, not with just focus, but energy, like what I'm willing to do in the day. And that I didn't even realize that those, just struggling the last few years, I just was like, well, everyone's struggling. But now that I have this new baseline, I'm like, my baseline was just like 10 notches lower, and I was just struggling to keep my head above water. And so that's why I'm so excited about this interview, because I feel like right now, how sometimes the world just sends you all the things that are at the top of your mind. Well, it's been coming up about how, depression and all of those things are not mental imbalances. So what are medications even doing? And I've interviewed a bunch of people, and most of the people are just like, well, we don't know what causes mental illness, but we do know this, or we don't know what this is. This is the best we got, and we do know this. And now you're here with all of these answers.
I know. As crazy as it sounds, your story makes perfect sense. I mean, did you make it all the way through Brain Energy? Or
almost?
Okay,
and so,
great.
Yeah, and it was just interesting to me because I thought my animal eating journey was going to be for pregnancy. Like, maybe the baby needs things that I didn't need, which was already kind of a struggle for me. But once I felt this just sort of mental freedom, I'm like, well, now I can't go back. So now I've been basically trying to heal the cognitive dissonance so that I don't feel badly about my diet, and really learning that there's a lot of things, like there's no harm-free food. Like, we think eating vegetables and whatever isn't killing anything, but there's a whole lot of death in soil tilling, and I could go on and on. So for the listeners out there who are vegan and wondering why I'm not vegan anymore and getting mad at me right now, I'm just sharing you the process that I went through and what it really means to me to listen to my body over an ideology, because I don't believe that I should be choosing an ideology over my own personal health, because then what can I add to this world?
Well, exactly. I think that, and I will say, without knowing specifics about what kind of a vegan diet you were following, whether you were supplementing or not for things like omega-3s and B12 and other vitamins that are primarily from animal-sourced foods, So vitamin B12 deficiency, I can just take that as a really simple, concrete concept. Vitamin B12 deficiency. We know with certainty people who follow vegan diets have much, much, much higher risk of B12 insufficiency or deficiency because B12 is found only in animal sourced foods. And so does that mean nobody can be vegan and be healthy? No, but it means that if you are a vegan, you have to pay attention to B12 levels and you may need to supplement with vitamin B12. And if you are B12 deficient, and this is common. So in India, there was a survey done in India because people in India have a strong preference for vegetarian or vegan lifestyles. And the rate of B12 deficiency in India is about 50%, 50%. So half their population is going around with a vitamin deficiency. So vitamin B12 is critical to the function of mitochondria. So it plays a powerful role in energy production in all of your cells, but it also plays a powerful role in something called one carbon metabolism, which is this process that mitochondria engage in to kind of when your cells are breaking down food, the food gets used for one of two things, to make it simple. It either gets used for energy, which is ATP at the cellular level, or it gets broken down into what we would call a building block. It gets broken down into some molecule that can be used to make something else, like proteins or like new DNA or RNA or membranes or other things. And mitochondria actually play a role in all of that. They play a role in producing both energy and these building blocks that the cells use. But if you're B12 deficient, that kind of halts or slows that process. And people can develop all sorts of metabolic and mental and neurological disorders as a result. And the treatment for that, if it's simply just B12 deficiency, the treatment for that is really simple. Get some B12 somehow or another. And that could be eating animal sourced foods, but it could also be a vitamin, an oral vitamin. For people who have trouble absorbing it, it could be a shot. But obviously, there are other deficiencies. Some people following vegan lifestyles can become protein deficient, and your body does need protein. That protein includes tryptophan, which gets converted into serotonin and melatonin. And those are actually really important things. They're like, everybody knows serotonin is like the happy neurotransmitter. It's actually a lot more than that, but it's really important to life. And it's really important to our function. Melatonin, that's the thing everybody's popping at night to try to sleep. Your body normally makes it and makes it fine, makes enough of it so that most people can sleep. But if you're really severely deficient in protein, tryptophan in particular, you may in fact become deficient in serotonin and, melatonin. And so those are just two easy examples. But I agree with what you said. At the end of the day, we all have choices to make. And the choices we make affect not only ourselves, but affect other people and affect the world and our environment. And I think we all do have a responsibility to be good stewards of our bodies, good stewards of our communities and our families, good stewards of the planet. But all of those things deserve attention. And you can't kill one at the expense of another. And when it comes to your own personal health, you absolutely cannot let your own personal health suffer. Because if your personal health, especially, you're a mother of one, about to be a mother of two, I can tell you now, not to put a guilt trip, but your kids are depending on you to be as happy and healthy and vibrant and energetic as possible for you. And if you know that you weren't that person, that means your kids in the end are going to, suffer somewhat or just not have the best possible life they could have. Your partner is going to be influenced by whether, you're running on fumes and you feel like you can barely keep up, or if you're feeling great and energetic and alive and happy to be alive and motivated, and you're like that person who's going 110% all the time. But again, it's a balance. It's not about being selfish. And so I'm going to forget about the environment. I'm going to forget about, animal welfare rights. I'm going to forget about everything else. But it's finding the right balance. And I think, it's something we're all striving to do.
Yeah, and for me, after kind of taking my own blinders off, I was able to see what I wasn't seeing even in veganism. Like there's a lot of really harmful farming practices that they do and that are depleting our soil even more, which is one of the reasons why our metabolisms are affected. So much of our farming, the way that we're farming, monocropping, whatever, is depleting our soil, and we're not getting the nutrients that these vegetables or whatever we're consuming originally had. So things actually have way less nutritional components to it than we need, which means that we need even more. I know a lot of people who believe that we can't get everything that we need from diet alone anymore. We need to supplement because of our depleted soil. For me, I did supplement those things. I did supplement B12. I always made sure I got my protein. What I didn't realize is that the bioavailability of protein sources is different. And so yeah, you might have a 40-gram protein piece of meat in front of you, and next to it, a cup of chickpeas that's also 40 grams of protein. So I thought I was being equal. What I didn't know is that my body's only absorbing 18 grams of that, and that's if my metabolism was working correctly. Versus if my metabolism's already shot from doing this over and over again and not eating in a way that optimizes my cells, I'm getting even less of that. And so those are just some realizations, and I'm still kind of going through this process, learning as I go. But when we are talking about these deficiencies, it's so easy to look at, veganism, or, this diet, whatever diet's just taking out a whole food group. Maybe that's not balance or whatever. But the standard American diet, a lot of people think they're getting food groups, and it's not necessarily even real food,
No.
And so we're all affected by this.
Absolutely. And there's no doubt that we're all affected. And the real answer as a scientist, I have to just say, is there are so many things out there that, at least some people have raised alarms about, but a lot of people either don't know about or aren't taking seriously. But, when we look at all the pesticides and herbicides and everything else that are getting used on the plants, we do know those do affect human metabolism. And so you have to start asking questions like that. Well, what chemicals did they put on the plants that I'm eating? And how did they apply them? Were they just applied while the plant was growing to keep bugs off? Or, some farming practices include, harvesting wheat, putting it into big kind of bales, and then spraying that bale, like that heap of wheat, with more pesticides so that nothing's going to bother it, so that any pest that comes in contact is going to die. Well, guess what? If those chemicals are killing those pests just like that, we have to at least ask the common sense question: is it possible that if it's killing pests so easily and quickly, that maybe that might not be the best thing for human metabolism as well? And does it kill humans immediately? Of course it doesn't, because we would all be dead if it did. But anything that impairs human metabolism ends up being a slow process that over time results in chronic disorders like obesity or diabetes, and in some cases like mental illness, like chronic depression, which for most people usually starts out as stress or burnout or anxiety. And people feel like, well, this is just my life. It's stressful right now. And like you said, there's a pandemic. I just had a baby. I'm a new mother. people come up with all sorts of good reasons why they might be feeling the way they're feeling, but they often don't recognize this might be my metabolism. And I think your story is such a perfect example of other stories that I've seen where you made a change in diet and saw profound effects on the way your brain was functioning and then just on how easy life became because your metabolism was revved up. And if you hadn't experienced that, you would have continued thinking, well, it's just the pandemic, or maybe I'm getting old. Who knows? Maybe, it's just, being a new mother wears you down. Everybody complains about being tired. Maybe that's why I'm so tired and run down. And it all makes sense until you have this epiphany and awakening, like, whoa, what just happened? Like, oh my God, I've got a new life. And I didn't realize I could feel so good.
Yeah. And there's another link that we have to make here and it's come up in so many different interviews recently. One interview in particular was just around a woman who had been misdiagnosed a ton of times. And then that led her to realizing all of the problems with the DSM, what is used to diagnose all of our mental illnesses. And a lot of people don't realize this, but they're all basically just guesses. You can't be measured. They can't be measured. There's no biological markers for any of these. So it's just like, this is what I'm feeling, and you give these symptoms to somebody and then they kind of compile them. They use a checklist and they figure out which category you fit into. But your research also talks about how these overlapping symptoms can also, one of the reasons for all of these overlapping symptoms and so many things, like why did I have depression and anxiety and bulimia and ADHD? You know what I mean? And so is it just that, oh, my brain is more prone to weakness than other people's, or is there something else going on there? And that the fact that the theory that this all comes back to our metabolism can play into the idea that, yes, that's why you're kind of triggered in all of these areas where it could fit you into a bunch of categories, but it's just a big sign that you need to work on your metabolism.
Yes. So, and that, so to kind of just build on what you said, a lot of people assume that our diagnostic labels are valid diagnoses because a lot of the labels have been around for, centuries. At least decades, but some of them centuries. So everybody assumes depression is a real diagnosis. Everybody assumes schizophrenia is a real thing. Like we've all heard it for decades. Everybody assumes anorexia and alcoholism. Those are real things. Of course they are. And when I say those words, like I know what they mean. I'm a psychiatrist and I know what they mean and I know what I'm going to be looking for. And they're very different from each other. One is somebody drinking too much, and another is somebody having hallucinations. And another is somebody who's just sad or depressed. Absolute clear-cut differences. And the way we treat them are different. But when you actually start to talk to real people, or when you even look at the research that's been done, the majority of people who have any diagnosis have more than one. And then when you even talk about any one diagnosis like schizophrenia, one person with schizophrenia can look very, very different than another person with schizophrenia. And you can say they can't possibly have the same illness. Like one can barely leave his home and he doesn't shower and he doesn't wear clean clothes and he mumbles to himself and he gets violent sometimes. And the other person can be holding a job and look perfectly, quote unquote, normal, but they say that they hear some voices every now and then. And so some psychiatrists told them they have schizophrenia. They both have the same, quote unquote, diagnosis, but their brains are very different and their ability to function in the world is very different. And so on one hand, saying that all mental disorders are metabolic disorders, in order to understand metabolism and all of it, and why would some people have some symptoms and not other symptoms, it quickly gets really, really complicated. And you can get lost in all of the complexity of metabolism. The great news is that once you understand that this is in fact the answer, mental disorders are metabolic problems in the brain. It basically means your brain, somewhere in your brain metabolism isn't working properly. And that's causing that part of your brain to malfunction. That's the easiest way to think about it. And depending on what parts of your brain are affected, you're going to have different symptoms and then different diagnostic labels. But once you understand that, the beautiful thing about this theory is that we can correct metabolism with broad-based, fairly straightforward treatments like diet and exercise and all of the things you're talking about on your podcast. Stress reduction, finding purpose, all of the things, all of it fits together. And in many ways, it doesn't matter exactly what part of your brain is malfunctioning. I mean, it matters because those are the symptoms that you're going to be having, but the treatments can be broad-based like that and can restore your brain health through these kind of global interventions that can work for a lot of different people. Like I said, with vitamin B12 deficiency, or some people can have like a thyroid hormone deficiency, for example. I mean, those are medical problems that we can test for and that might require specific treatments. So I don't want to say that if everybody changes their diet, that they'll all be cured, because I don't think it's that simple. But I do think that coming up with a broad base of tools that we can use to restore balance and restore metabolism will actually get the overwhelming majority of people better.
And so you even talk about how potentially some of these differing disorders might all be related and just maybe different ends of the spectrum, like possibly bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and schizoaffective disorder may all be the same illness, just on a spectrum of symptoms with different existing treatments somehow.
Yes. So that actually should not be controversial. It's controversial according to DSM, but it is actually not. This may be surprising to your listeners, but it is not controversial to the National Institute of Health. So the National Institutes of Health actually abandoned the DSM diagnostic labels over a decade ago because they realized they are not legitimate diagnoses. They just are not legit. They don't mean anything. And this distinction between schizophrenia and schizoaffective and bipolar disorder in particular was kind of the final nail in the coffin of that, is that the government spent millions and millions of dollars researching that exact question, because everybody knows that schizophrenia is a legit disorder and bipolar is, and schizoaffective is, but we call them different things, so there must be something different about them. And the researchers looked at everything they could think of. They looked at their genetics. They looked at their family histories. They drew blood samples and looked at inflammation. They did EEGs and brain scans and gave people diagnostic questionnaires and cognitive questionnaires. And I mean, they tested everything they could think of in patients with those three diagnostic labels, but also in their family members who didn't have any psychiatric diagnoses or who had other psychiatric diagnoses, and then also in quote unquote normal healthy controls. And what the researchers found are that the people who are diagnosed with bipolar or schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder were definitely different than the normal healthy controls. They weren't always that different from their from their siblings, because some of the siblings also had other diagnoses like depression or anxiety or personality disorders or alcoholism or all sorts of other things. But when they even just looked at the patients with those three diagnoses, it was impossible to tell them apart based on anything they measured. Genetics didn't show any differences. Brain scans didn't show any differences. EEGs didn't. Questionnaires didn't. Cognitive functioning, nothing showed a difference. And yet their diagnostic symptoms, their symptoms were somewhat different. And that allowed psychiatrists using DSM to give them different labels. But what that research study showed us, and again, this was a multi-site, multi-million-dollar government-funded study. What that study showed us definitively, without a doubt, is that those three diagnoses are not distinct entities. They are a spectrum disorder. The much more shocking thing that my book and many other researchers have already asserted, and again, including the National Institutes of Health, is that those diagnoses aren't all that different from chronic depression or chronic PTSD. That if we look at measurements of brain scans or inflammation or genetics or other things, even though the symptoms are very different, they end up being similar diagnoses. And I know that's really hard for people to understand. Maybe I'll give one easy example to help people understand this. Everybody knows about COVID nowadays. Some people get COVID and they have no symptoms at all. They don't even know they've got it. They just got a test and they test positive, but they have COVID. They have an infection with a virus and it's a COVID. They've got COVID. Other people get COVID and they get like flu-like symptoms for, a whole week. They feel like, awful and tired and run down and, can barely get out of bed. They have the same diagnosis, the exact same diagnosis. But now those two people look very different from each other because one's not having any symptoms at all and the other is in bed. But we could look at a third person, a really old, frail, elderly person. That person could end up in the hospital on a ventilator and die within 3 days. That person looks very different than the one who doesn't have any symptoms. And yet they all have the exact same disorder. It's an infection with a virus. And that is the way I want people to think about mental illness. Is mental illness is a metabolic problem somewhere in your brain. And depending on who you are and what vulnerabilities you have and all of the different causes of your metabolic problem, whether it's diet or stress or lack of sleep or other things, depending on the mix of all of those things, you can get very different symptoms. So back to your original point, I am actually arguing that we need to abandon the DSM diagnostic labels because they are essentially worthless. And again, I know that sounds crazy, but the National Institute of Health has been there for over a decade already, folks. Some of our best, smartest research neuroscientists in the world already figured this out over 10 years ago. And we're not going to make progress as long as we continue to say there's this thing called schizophrenia and there's this other thing called bipolar, and they're very different from each other. And we keep looking for what causes one and what causes the other. And they have to be different causes because they're different labels. And that's why we're not making any progress in the mental health field, is because we're not owning up to the science that we already have. We're not facing the facts. And the facts make us question the whole system that mental health is based on. And they force us to rethink so much. And that kind of change is going to be hard and it's going to take time. The reason I'm so hopeful about it is because once you understand it's a metabolic problem, I, as a clinician, can help real people today get better. I can help them get over their schizophrenia. I can help them move on from their bipolar disorder. I can help them move on from their chronic PTSD using metabolic strategies.
I have like 9 epiphanies in this episode. It's interesting to think about how difficult it'll be to enact change just because it's so hard to disrupt systems that are already in place. These professionals that are very attached to their knowledge of the DSM. But there's another layer that I've found, at least in going through my own journey, is like when I was on Adderall, I was very attached to that medication for a number of different reasons, but it was my Adderall. I have to take my Adderall today. Like when I decided I was going to get off of that, it was this whole, I had to do a lot of mindset work around it. Like I had to write down all of the negative effects of it for my life, all of the things I could be missing out on if I was attached to this drug my whole life, the ways that it would affect certain things in the future. Like I had to write them down and look at them all the time so I could like rewire my brain about it. And people are attached to their diagnoses in ways that a lot of people that don't have a diagnosis might not understand. And it's for a number of reasons. Reasons I used to be attached to my diagnoses is one, when I found it, then I felt like there was a pathway to help. But then eventually it became, for me, not saying this for everyone, it became an excuse to fall back on, well, oh, that's my ADD, or that's because I have depression, or I can't do this because of that. And so it's just this sort of outlet for a lot of different things. And so all of that's going to be really hard to get around. So if you're listening to this and you hear yourself in that, like that, those could be some questions that you bring up to yourself as well, because sometimes our attachment to something makes it hard to move through it as also. But additionally, I'm wondering about medications, because just like there's a spectrum of disorders, there's a spectrum of responses to medications. And I live a very, I do not like medication. I'm very biased against it. I know logically it's very helpful. I will use it in a worst case scenario, but I was overprescribed for way too long. And so part of my bias was that work I had to do so I wouldn't be so attached to them. But I'm wondering, because this has come up a lot in the news lately, how depression is not a chemical imbalance in the brain, and how what are medications even really doing at this point? And so since some people do experience relief, whether temporary or for long periods of time, are those medications affecting our metabolisms as well? And that's what's causing those changes?
So it's a great question. And I tackle this question in great depth in the book. And at the end of the day, all medications are going to influence metabolism. There's no way around it. And again, that's because if you really understand metabolism, you understand it's just part of the definition of a living organism, and it's something fundamental to what living organisms are doing. So there's almost no way a medication can't affect metabolism, and it has to. But in terms of psychiatric medications, we have some psychiatric medications that speed up metabolism. And Adderall is a perfect example of that. We call it speed in part because of that. It is speeding up your metabolism, and it's all the way to the cellular level. It's revving up ATP production. For some people, that can be really beneficial. And so if you've got regions of your brain, for instance, that are just sluggish and underactive, it can stimulate those brain regions to be more active, and that can be beneficial to some people. And I have one patient who has used a stimulant for over 40 years, and she is a high-functioning, delightful, super intelligent, married with kids and grandkids woman. And it has served her well. I've asked her over the years, do you want to try to get off of it? No. Why would I do that? My life is good. I've been on this for 40 years. Why would I change? So I hold her out as a perfect example of somebody who has benefited from the medication. She went on it because she had horrible, crippling depression. She had tried lots of antidepressants and they did not work, but a stimulant did work for her. And I suspect that she would probably be fine off of it if we did it slowly enough. But she's got it in her mind that depression, that horrible, terrifying depression will come back if she goes off of it. And she's not having too many side effects. So to her, it's not worth the risk. And, so again, I hold her out as an example of she clearly benefited from the medicine. It's not appearing to harm her. She's an older woman now and doing quite well still. So that's a good example. The huge concern is that some psychiatric medications, we know with certainty from numerous studies that they are impairing metabolism. They are slowing your metabolism. And that can be helpful because when parts of your brain are overactive it causes symptoms. So if the anxiety part of your brain is overactive, it means you're going to have anxiety symptoms for no clear reason. You could almost think of it as like a little mini seizure of your anxiety pathways, that they're overactive. And one way to stop that or slow that down is to actually suppress metabolism in those cells. But when you suppress metabolism in those cells, you're also probably suppressing metabolism in lots of other cells in the brain and body. And what that means is that many of the medications we prescribe will cause weight gain. They can cause type 2 diabetes. They can cause cardiovascular disease or the risk factors for it. And in older people, at least, we know that they can cause premature mortality. And although those things may sound scary and shocking, and you may think I'm an anti-medication fanatic, I'm not. Those are all on the package inserts issued by the FDA. If you just read it, that's what you'll read. And we know down to the cellular level that those medications are impairing metabolism. And I have every reason to believe, based on the brain energy theory, that those medications may actually reduce symptoms in the short run, which is great. People feel better in the short run, but they might actually be keeping people ill in the long run because it's not allowing your metabolism to heal itself and repair itself. And the statistics throughout the world, our treatments fail to work for far too many people. Standard psychiatric medications fail to work for way, way too many people. So much so that, mental disorders are the leading cause of disability on the planet now. And it's not because people aren't getting treatment. It's because the treatments that they're being offered aren't working. And I am terribly concerned, based on this theory, that there may very well be medications that we are prescribing to people that are keeping them ill. And I want to say, just for any of your listeners who might be alarmed by that or think, oh my God, I'm getting off my medicine. Please don't try to get off your medicine just cold turkey on your own. It can be really dangerous. It can be very difficult. And I really want to encourage people to try to do that with their mental health provider or whoever's prescribing for you. Try to do it in a safe and responsible way. I am all for helping people get off meds. So please don't hear that as I don't want you to be off your meds. I just want you to do it in a safe way. And stopping your meds cold turkey is horribly, horribly dangerous. I've seen it time and again. It is really, really dangerous. Even if you hate your meds and you don't think they're helping you, and you listen to what I just said and said, these might even be hurting me over the long run. And you might be really upset right now. You have every reason to be upset, but please do it in a safe way.
So for listeners that might be wondering, maybe they're on a medication and they're like, okay, well, what are my other options? How do I see how my metabolism's running? Or maybe if they're not on medications and they're just like, okay, I live in this country with all of these food and chemical corruption issues. There's got to be something. I feel like we've all probably got some sort of gut issues to be working out on, and it just depends how bad are they and what else is it affecting, and what is the time frame really until it starts affecting your life in a more damaging way. So where do people start, especially since most people don't have this information? Like I said, I interview experts all the time, and I'm like, what causes mental illness? And most people are like, we don't know. So if they're not talking directly to you, where is that starting point for finding help?
So it's a great question. So I will say step number one is find out about, either read the book Brain Energy or find out about it. And I'm not here to sell my book. I do not want to ever be accused of just hawking a book or whatever. So if you don't want to purchase it, go get it from the library or borrow it from a friend or learn about it some other way. Follow me on Twitter and I'll share as much information as I can in tweets, but tweets are tweets and they're not a 340-page book. So I would say best place to start is read the book and get all of the information, because there is so much information to absorb and to take into account when you're trying to understand, so what could be the problem for me and what could be some solutions. Step 2 is you could, hopefully by the time this podcast airs, I will have a website, brainenergy.com. And I want you to go to brainenergy.com because I'm going to have a self-assessment tool on assessing your metabolic health and your mental health that kind of combines the two. And I am hoping to populate that website with lots of free resources, free information, patient stories, everything else. Step number 3 could be talk to your mental health professional. If you've got a mental health professional or even a primary care doctor or anyone, talk to them and ask them if they know about the metabolic theory of mental illness. If they don't know about it, encourage them to learn about it. Hopefully they will know about it soon enough, and they might be an important ally in helping you create and design a treatment program that might include trying to get you off medication slowly but surely, use a lot of other holistic, comprehensive treatments that are going to repair your metabolism, your gut, your brain, all of it, so that you can become healthy, self-sufficient, independent, and live without medications and eventually live without, mental health treatment. Like, I am hoping, a lot of people may fear that like Chris Palmer is going to break the bank and, because we've already got a mental health crisis and Chris Palmer wants these comprehensive treatments offered to everybody. These comprehensive treatments will get people better and all the way better so that they can be independent, functioning human beings. We can take people off of disability and get them jobs. So now, not only are they not receiving disability payments, now they're tax-paying citizens again. Instead of paying for prescription medicines, 4 different medicines, 10 different medicines, and sometimes more every single year for the rest of your life because people aren't getting better with these chronic mental disorders, maybe we get people all the way better and then they don't need any of these medicines. And think about how much money we're going to save with all that. So I think there are lots of things that your listeners can do, but the book, the website, brainenergy.com, talk to a mental health provider, those are all involved. And I just want to put a quick plug in. I am looking to disrupt the mental health system. So many people, millions and millions and millions of people are fed up and tired and desperate for better answers. And I really want to disrupt the mental health system, and I need your help. So if you want to join a movement, if you want to be part of comprehensive, holistic, metabolic treatments for mental disorders, please go to brainenergy.com and get involved. You can help start a revolution, and we can improve the mental health of people in the world.
All the links for this episode will be at mindlove.com/263. Your challenge for this week is to self-assess your metabolic and mental health. And so I want you to ask yourself, basically, how is my mind functioning on a day-to-day basis? Minus any of the excuses about what might be going on around you. Just ask yourself, am I usually happy? Do I have a lot of mood swings? What do I feel? Do I have a general optimistic attitude? Do I feel like I don't want to get out of bed in the morning? Things like that. Then self-assess your metabolic health. But when people think about metabolism, they only think about how quickly they're losing weight or how quickly they poop after a meal. But what I am learning is that metabolism is so much more than that. Metabolism is the root of all of your cellular function. So there were things that I just thought were what I was like. Example, I pee all the time. It's kind of a difficult assessment because I pee all the time right now because I'm pregnant, but I have a notoriously small bladder. I just have to pee often, sometimes after 10 minutes. Apparently, that's a metabolic function thing. Also, getting cold all the time is a metabolic thing. I just thought it was because I was thin. There's a lot like this. It could be what your skin looks like, how much energy you have, how well your organs are functioning. Everything comes back to metabolism because we feed ourselves. That's what processes it. It sends all the energy to all of our parts. It's this complex system, but the metabolism is at the root of it. And so all of our brain functioning, our mental health, is also connected to that metabolic function. So the more awareness you can bring to how your mind and body are actually working, the more quickly you can identify if there are some changes to be made. If you want to go a step further, be honest with yourself about your diet, about what you're eating. Is it mostly processed foods? Is it mostly sugars? Is it mostly chemical ingredients? Are you eating a lot of whole foods? Are you matching proteins with fats and sugars, or are you just eating a bunch of sugar at once or a bunch of protein at once? These are the things that I'm thinking about often now, and it's making a huge difference. So let me know how it goes. Reach out to me on Instagram at mindlovemelissa. If you love this episode, consider sharing it. Take a screenshot, tag Mind Love Melissa and Mind Love Podcast on social media, or send it directly to a friend. Also, you can join Mind Love Premium at mindlove.com/premium, where you get extra episodes, early release, ad-free listening, and meditations. You can also support one of my amazing sponsors, and all of those are listed at mindlove.com/sponsors. And that's all for today. So thanks for giving your mind a little love today, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks for tuning into Your Higher Frequency with Mind Love. Head to mindlove.com for a free gift to keep your vibes up until next week.